The morning fog rolled through the streets of San Francisco as Natalie Chen stepped off the cable car at Montgomery Street. She carried her usual coffee in one hand and her leather briefcase in the other, walking with the quiet determination of someone who had worked hard to earn her place in the world. At 27, she had learned that success came not from being the loudest voice in the room, but from being the most reliable one. Hayes Global Tech occupied the top 15 floors of the gleaming tower that pierced through the fog like a beacon of innovation. The company had revolutionized cloud computing security, and its CEO, Julian Hayes, was known throughout Silicon Valley as both a genius and a mystery. While other tech leaders courted publicity, Julian preferred to let his work speak for itself. Natalie pushed through the revolving doors into the marble lobby, where morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, creating patterns on the polished stone floor. The building always felt alive with possibility, filled with brilliant minds working to shape the future of technology. The familiar routine. Robert, the morning security guard, waved as she passed through the checkpoint. "Morning, Miss Chen. How was your weekend?" "Wonderful, Robert. I finally made it to Half Moon Bay." "How is your daughter doing with her college applications?" Natalie asked, genuinely interested. "She got into Berkeley, thanks to that recommendation letter Mr. Hayes wrote." "We can never thank you enough for arranging that," Robert replied, his eyes grateful. Natalie smiled warmly. "She earned it with her own merit. I just made sure the right people knew about her talent." This was who Natalie was, someone who noticed the people others overlooked, who remembered birthdays and family stories, who made the corporate world feel a little more human. It was perhaps why she had become indispensable to Julian Hayes, though she often wondered if he saw her as anything more than an efficient assistant. The elevator carried her to the 45th floor, where her desk sat outside Julian's corner office. She had worked here for 3 years, and in that time, she had learned to anticipate his needs before he voiced them, to solve problems before they became crises, and to maintain the seamless operation of his professional life. The message that changed everything. Her phone buzzed as she settled into her chair. Christine, her college roommate and best friend, had sent a message. "Girl, I need beach day photos. My life is all spreadsheets and conference calls. Give me something to live for." Natalie laughed quietly. Her weekend trip to Half Moon Bay had been spontaneous, completely unlike her usually planned existence. She had driven down the coast alone, found a quiet stretch of beach, and spent the afternoon just being herself. No schedules, no responsibilities, just the ocean and the sun and a rare feeling of complete freedom, orchestrated narrative progression with tension escalation and character diversification that I need to continue with the story, describing the beach photo and the accidental sending. I should keep it engaging and build tension naturally. The photo she had taken was simple but joyful. She stood at the water's edge in a coral-colored swimsuit, arms outstretched, laughing as a wave crashed around her ankles. Her long black hair was loose and windblown, and her face held an expression of pure happiness that rarely appeared during her carefully professional workdays. She scrolled through her photos, found the perfect one, and typed a quick message to Christine. "This is what freedom looks like. We both need more of this in our lives." Her finger hovered over Christine's name in her contacts. She selected it, attached the photo, and pressed send. The familiar swoosh sound confirmed the message was delivered, and she set her phone down to check her email. 30 seconds passed before her phone lit up again with a notification that made her blood freeze in her veins. Message delivered to Julian Hayes. The coffee cup slipped from her hand, splashing across her desk calendar. "No," she whispered, grabbing her phone with shaking fingers. "Please, no." But there it was, undeniable and terrifying. The beach photo, her photo, showing her in a way her boss had never seen her, had just landed directly in Julian Hayes's inbox. Not Christine. Julian. The panic sets in. Natalie's mind raced through impossible scenarios. She could claim her phone was hacked. She could pretend it never happened. She could submit her resignation immediately and move to another city, maybe another country. Did Japan need English-speaking assistance? Her hands trembled as she pulled up Julian's contact information. She had to send a follow-up message, some kind of explanation. But what could she possibly say that would make this less mortifying? Mr. Hayes, please disregard my previous message. It was sent in error. She stared at the words. They sounded so formal, so cold, and they explained nothing. She deleted them and tried again. Julian, I apologize. That photo was meant for someone else. Worse. Now it sounded like she was sending beach photos to multiple people. She deleted it again, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The elevator chimed across the hall. Natalie looked up, and her heart stopped completely. The man who held her future. Julian Hayes stepped onto the floor, and as always, his presence seemed to shift the very air around him. At 34, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had built an empire before most people finished graduate school. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that always looked slightly disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it while solving complex problems. His gray eyes held an intensity that could be intimidating, but Natalie had learned to read the kindness behind that sharp intelligence. He wore his usual uniform, dark jeans, a crisp white shirt, and a blazer that managed to look both casual and expensive. This was Silicon Valley, where billionaires dressed like college students, but Julian had found a middle ground that commanded respect without demanding attention. Good morning, Natalie, he said, his voice carrying that slight roughness that appeared after his morning runs along the Embarcadero. Good morning, Mr. Hayes, she managed, her voice sounding almost normal despite the chaos in her chest. He paused at her desk, and for one terrible moment, she was certain he would mention the photo. Instead, he said, I need the quarterly reports ready by 11, and please reschedule the venture capital meeting. Something unexpected has come up. Of course. Anything else? The words came out automatically, years of professionalism overriding her panic. His gray eyes studied her face for just a moment longer than usual. That will be all for now. He walked into his office, and Natalie released a breath she had not known she was holding. Maybe he had not seen the message yet. Maybe she still had time to figure out how to handle this disaster. The summons. 40 minutes crawled by. Natalie threw herself into work, reorganizing files, answering emails, doing anything to keep her mind from replaying the moment she had sent that photo. Every time her phone made a sound, her heart performed acrobatics that would impress Olympic athletes. At precisely 10:30, Julian's office door opened. Natalie, could you come in here for a moment, please? The words were polite, but they carried the weight of inevitability. This was it. This was how 3 years of hard work would end, not with poor performance or office politics, but with a beach photo sent to the wrong person. She stood on legs that felt like water and walked into his office. The space was modern and minimalist, with clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the San Francisco Bay. Julian stood with his back to her, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city he had helped transform. Close the door, please, he said quietly. Natalie's hand shook slightly as she pulled the door shut. The click of the latch sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. I received an interesting message from you this morning, Julian said, still facing the window. Mr. Hayes, I can explain, Natalie began, though she had no idea what explanation would possibly suffice. Can you? He turned around, and his expression was unlike anything she had seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, but something else entirely. Something that made her heart race for completely different reasons. Because I am very curious, he continued, his voice softer now, about why you have been hiding the fact that you have an actual life outside these walls. That you are someone who laughs like that. Someone who knows how to be free. In that moment, Natalie realized this conversation was about to change everything, though she had no idea whether it would destroy her carefully built world or transform it into something she had never dared to imagine. Natalie stood frozen in the middle of Julian's office, trying to process his words. They made no sense. She had expected anger, maybe disappointment, perhaps even immediate termination. But this? This gentle questioning about her life outside work? It was so unexpected that her carefully prepared apologies vanished from her mind. "I don't understand," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian moved away from the window, perching on the edge of his desk in a way that was far too casual for their usual dynamic. The morning light caught the gray in his eyes, making them seem almost silver. He looked tired, she realized, as if he had not slept well. "Sit down, Natalie. Please." It was not a command but a request, and that small difference made all the difference in the world. She sank into one of the leather chairs facing his desk, her hands gripping the armrests. Julian was quiet for a long moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "In 3 years, you have been the most professional, dedicated, and capable person I have ever worked with," he began. "You anticipate problems before they happen. You remember details that even I forget. You make this entire operation run smoothly." "That is my job," Natalie said softly. "Yes, it is. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing just an excellent assistant. I started seeing you." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and electric. 3 years of silence. Julian stood and walked to the window again, as if the distance made it easier to speak the truth. "Do you remember your second week here? There was that disaster with the Singapore investors. Their flight was delayed, the presentation files were corrupted, and the conference room system crashed 30 minutes before the meeting." Natalie nodded slowly. How could she forget? It had been her first real test. "You stayed until midnight, rebuilding the entire presentation from scratch. You arranged alternative accommodations for the investors, set up a backup system in another building, and had fresh coffee and pastries ready when they arrived. You saved a $40 million deal." He turned to face her. "I watched you work through it all without once losing your composure or making excuses. That was when I first thought you were extraordinary." Her heart was beating so fast she felt dizzy. "Mr. Hayes." "Julian," he corrected gently. "Please call me Julian, at least for this conversation." "Julian," she repeated, the name feeling strange and intimate on her tongue. "I still do not understand what this has to do with the photo." He smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. 6 months ago, you mentioned in passing that you had never seen the Golden Gate Bridge at sunrise. You had lived in San Francisco for 5 years, worked blocks away from one of the world's most beautiful landmarks, and never given yourself permission to just experience it. The small details that meant everything. Natalie remembered that conversation. They had been working late on the merger documents, and she had made a casual comment. She had not thought he was really listening. "That same week," Julian continued, "I noticed you ate lunch at your desk every single day. Not because you were required to, but because you felt guilty taking a full hour for yourself. You work weekends without being asked. You never take vacation days. You live like someone who believes she has to earn her right to exist." The observation struck too close to home. Natalie looked down at her hands. "I just want to do my job well." "I know. And you do. Better than anyone I have ever seen." He moved closer, his voice dropping lower. "But when I saw that photo this morning, I saw something I have been looking for in 3 years. I saw joy. Real, unguarded happiness. You were not being efficient Natalie, or professional Natalie, or the woman who apologizes for being human. You were just you." Tears pricked at her eyes, though she fought them back. No one had ever seen her so clearly before. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Julian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a vulnerability she had never heard before. Because I have been trying to find a way to ask you to dinner for 2 years. And every time I got close, I reminded myself about professional boundaries and power dynamics and all the reasons why it would be wrong. The impossible question. Natalie's breath caught in her throat. You wanted to ask me to dinner? I wanted to ask you so much more than that, Julian admitted. But you were my assistant, and I was your boss, and I knew what people would say. I knew how it would look. So I kept my distance and told myself it was the right thing to do. He crossed the room until he stood just a few feet away from her. This close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the slight shadow of stubble on his jaw, the way his hands were not quite steady. But that photo, he continued, showed me that while I have been protecting your professional reputation, you have been missing out on life. And I have been lying to myself about why I really kept my distance. It was not just about propriety. It was because I knew that if I ever got close to you, really close, would not want to let go. Natalie stood on shaking legs. Julian, this is crazy. You are my boss. I am your assistant. There are rules about this sort of thing. I know, he said simply. And if you tell me right now that you want to keep things exactly as they are, I will respect that completely. We will pretend this conversation never happened. You will remain the best assistant I have ever had, and I will continue being the boss who appreciates your work. Nothing will change. But, she prompted, her heart in her throat. But if there is even a small part of you that wants to know what might happen if we break the rules, then have dinner with me tonight. Not as my assistant. Just as Natalie. The woman who laughs at the ocean and deserves to be happy. The decision that changes everything. Natalie's mind was spinning. Every practical, sensible part of her brain was screaming warnings. This could ruin her career. People would say she had slept her way to the top. The office would become unbearable if things went wrong. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to throw it all away for romance. But there was another voice, quieter but growing stronger. It was the voice of the woman in that beach photo, the one who had learned to laugh freely. That voice asked a simple question: when was the last time someone saw you, really saw you, and wanted to know more? I need to know something first, Natalie said carefully. Is this because of the photo? Because I can assure you, that is not who I am every day. I was just having a good moment. Julian shook his head. The photo was just the catalyst. I have been watching you be extraordinary for 3 years. I have seen you handle impossible situations with grace. I have watched you show kindness to everyone from interns to board members. I have noticed the way you bite your lip when you are concentrating, and how you always keep fresh flowers on your desk because they make you smile. He took a breath. The woman in that photo is beautiful, yes. But she is not more beautiful than the woman who brings Robert's daughter college brochures, or who stays late to help the new assistants learn the systems, or who somehow always knows when I need coffee before I realize it myself. Natalie felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been locked away for too long. This is a terrible idea, she whispered. Probably, Julian agreed. People will talk. They will. I could lose my job. You could, he said. Though I would never let that happen. And if you wanted to move to a different department, or even a different company with a stellar recommendation, I would support that too. Your career will not suffer because of my feelings. I promise you that. The leap of faith. Natalie looked into his eyes and saw sincerity there, and hope, and something that looked very much like the same fear she felt. Julian Hayes, the man who commanded boardrooms and built empires, was nervous. He was taking a risk, just as she would be. One dinner, she heard herself say. Just to see. The smile that broke across his face was worth every risk she was taking. One dinner, he agreed. And Natalie, If at any point you feel uncomfortable or want to go back to how things were, just say the word. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, probably Christine wondering about the beach photo. The irony was not lost on her. A mistaken message had just opened a door she had not even known existed. I should get back to work, she said, though neither of them moved. Yes, the quarterly reports, Julian said, but his eyes were still on her face, warm and intent. Where should I meet you? Natalie asked. For dinner. I will pick you up at 7. Text me your address. He paused. And Natalie? Wear whatever makes you happy. Not what you think you should wear. As she walked back to her desk, Natalie felt as if the entire world had shifted on its axis. Nothing looked different, but everything had changed. The office buzzed with its usual activity, people rushing past with coffee and laptops, completely unaware that their CEO and his assistant had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She sat down at her desk and pulled up the quarterly reports, but the numbers blurred before her eyes. Tonight, she would have dinner with Julian Hayes. Not Mr. Hayes, her boss, but Julian, the man who had been watching her for 3 years and saw beauty in details she had never thought anyone would notice. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, looking forward to tonight. And thank you for taking a chance on something terrifying and possibly wonderful. Natalie saved the number under Julian and smiled. Sometimes the biggest mistakes led to the best adventures. She just hoped her heart was ready for whatever came next. Natalie stood in front of her closet for 20 minutes, staring at clothes that suddenly felt like they belonged to a stranger. Julian had said to wear whatever made her happy, but happiness felt like a foreign concept when her entire future hung in the balance. She finally chose a simple emerald green dress that brought out the warmth in her skin tone. It was elegant without being too formal, comfortable without being casual. As she fastened delicate gold earrings, she caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes held an excitement she had not seen in years. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Punctual, as always. But when Natalie opened the door, the man standing there was nothing like the CEO she saw every day at the office. Julian wore dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that made his gray eyes seem darker, more intense. His hair was slightly messed up, as if he had run his hands through it nervously. He held a single white orchid, delicate and perfect. You look beautiful, he said softly. Though I suppose I should not be surprised. You always do. Natalie took the orchid, her fingers brushing his. Thank you. You look different. Good different. I left the CEO at the office, Julian said with a small smile. Tonight, I am just a man having dinner with someone extraordinary. A different world. The restaurant was not what Natalie expected. Instead of some expensive establishment in the financial district, Julian drove them to a small Italian place in North Beach, tucked away on a quiet side street. The lighting was warm and low, and the air smelled of garlic, basil, and fresh bread. My grandmother used to bring me here when I was a kid, Julian explained as they settled into a corner booth. Long before Hayes Global Tech, before the money and the success. She wanted me to remember where I came from. I did not know you grew up in San Francisco, Natalie said. Most people do not. The business magazines prefer the story of the self-made tech genius who appeared out of nowhere. He smiled sadly. The truth is messier. My parents died when I was 8. My grandmother raised me in a tiny apartment in the Mission District. She worked 2 jobs to keep me in good schools. Natalie felt her heart squeeze. I am so sorry, Julian. She passed away 5 years ago, just before the company really took off. She never got to see what I built, but I think about her every day. He looked around the restaurant with obvious affection. This place reminds me that success means nothing if you forget the people who loved you when you had nothing. The truth about loneliness. They ordered food they barely tasted, too caught up in conversation that flowed like water finding its natural course. Julian talked about the isolation of being at the top, how every relationship felt transactional, how people wanted the CEO but not the man. "Do you know what the worst part is?" he asked, leaning forward. "I can have a room full of people, all of them wanting my attention, my approval, my time. But I go home to an empty apartment and realize that none of them actually see me. They see what I can do for them." "That sounds incredibly lonely," Natalie said quietly. "It is. And then 3 years ago, this brilliant woman walked into my office for her first day of work. She was nervous but trying hard not to show it. She had researched every project the company was working on, memorized the names of all the department heads, and brought her own coffee because she did not want to waste time on her first day." Natalie laughed despite herself. "I was terrified. I needed that job so badly." "I know. I could see it in the way your hands shook when you handed me the morning briefings." His voice softened. "But you know what else I saw? Someone who cared deeply about doing things right. Someone who treated everyone with respect, regardless of their position. Someone real in a world full of people wearing masks. Dreams deferred." "What about you?" Julian asked. "What do you dream about, Natalie? Beyond spreadsheets and scheduling?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in years. She had been so focused on survival, on building security, on proving her worth, that she had forgotten she was allowed to want more. "I used to want to be a writer," she admitted. "Stories, novels, anything that let me create worlds where broken things could be fixed and people got second chances." "What stopped you?" "Life. Reality. Student loans and rent and the need to eat." She smiled without humor. "My parents immigrated from Taiwan with nothing. They worked so hard to give me opportunities. I could not throw away a stable career to chase something as impractical as writing." Julian reached across the table and took her hand. The touch sent electricity through her entire body. "What if it is not impractical? What if the only impractical thing is spending your whole life doing what you think you should do instead of what makes you come alive?" Natalie felt tears threaten again. "You make it sound so simple. It is not simple at all. It is terrifying. But I am learning that the things worth having usually are." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I built a billion-dollar company, but I forgot to build a life. You have been so busy being indispensable that you forgot you deserve more than just being useful. When everything falls apart." The evening felt like a dream, suspended outside of time and consequence. But reality came crashing back 3 days later when Natalie arrived at work to find Victoria Chen, the company's chief operating officer, waiting at her desk. "Miss Chen, I need to speak with you in my office immediately." Natalie's stomach dropped. Victoria was known for her sharp intelligence and zero tolerance for impropriety. She followed the older woman down the hall, her heart pounding. "I will be direct," Victoria said the moment the door closed. "You have been seen having dinner with Mr. Hayes. Multiple employees witnessed you leaving together last night from the parking garage. This is a serious violation of company policy." "I understand your concern," Natalie began, but Victoria held up a hand. "This is not just about policy. The board is already raising questions. Some members believe Mr. Hayes is being manipulated. Others think you are using your position for personal gain. Either way, this relationship puts both of you in an impossible position." The words hit like physical blows. This was exactly what Natalie had feared. "What happens now?" "That depends on Mr. Hayes. But I will tell you this, off the record. I have worked with Julian for 8 years. I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. The question is whether he values his company more than he values whatever this is between you. The choice. That afternoon, the board called an emergency meeting. Natalie was not present, but she heard about it from whispers in the hallways. The ultimatum was clear: end the relationship or face serious consequences. Several board members threatened to resign. Major investors were questioning Julian's judgment. When Julian emerged from the conference room, his face was unreadable. He walked straight past Natalie's desk into his office and closed the door. Her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. An hour later, he called her in. "They gave me a choice," he said quietly, standing by the window where this had all begun. "The company or you." Natalie felt the tears she had been holding back finally break free. "Julian, you cannot choose me. Hayes Global Tech is your legacy. It is everything you have built." "I thought so too," he said, turning to face her. His eyes were red, as if he had been crying. "But then I realized something. I built this company to matter, to make a difference, to create something meaningful. But what is the point of all that success if I am not brave enough to fight for what actually makes me happy?" "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I told the board exactly where they could put their ultimatum." He crossed the room and took both her hands in his. "I am saying that I would rather lose everything I have built than lose you before we even have a chance to see what we could be together." The new beginning. The next few weeks were chaos. 3 board members resigned. The company's stock dipped. Business magazines ran headlines about the CEO who chose love over logic. But Julian never wavered. He promoted Natalie to a different department, eliminating the direct reporting relationship that made their romance problematic. He brought in an independent firm to ensure no favoritism was shown. He faced every criticism head-on, making it clear that Natalie had earned every opportunity she received based on merit alone. Slowly, the storm began to calm. The remaining board members, seeing Julian's dedication to both the company and transparency, began to support him. The stock recovered. And through it all, Julian and Natalie built something real, something that had nothing to do with offices and everything to do with 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds. 6 months later, on the same beach where Natalie had taken that fateful photo, Julian got down on one knee in the sand. The ring was simple and perfect, and when Natalie said yes, she knew she was not just saying yes to marriage. She was saying yes to a life where she was seen, valued, and loved for exactly who she was. Sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the greatest love stories. And sometimes breaking all the rules is the only way to find what you were meant to have all along. The end was just the beginning of their forever.